Alright, so this time we're going for the second fire sign being on Tammuz 7 or Tammuz 8. Tammuz 7 is the late 1NC Pentecost. Sivan 7 this year, 2020, was the 1NC Pentecost from Nisan 18 First Fruits. And Tammuz 7 is the late version of that. And then we're going for the third fire sign of 1 Kings 18, which is the attack on the UK. Second is the attack on Manhattan. We're going for that for Tammuz 20, Tammuz 21. Tammuz 21 is the 9th 2NC Pentecost, excluding Shabbat 21, which is in the Sabbath month. And the Gregorian dates for that are that the second fire sign is June 29 to July 1. That's the producing a mushroom cloud over the Hudson in Manhattan. And the third fire sign is July 12 to 14, producing a mushroom cloud over the Thames round about Dartford. And that's the solution to 1 Kings 18. We've now worked the following out. You cannot hold a festival, a congregating festival, which involves work of congregating together and travelling. You cannot do that in a Sabbath month. You can do it in a Jubilee month. And that moves things by a month, basically. Because our previous predictions were Sivan 7 and Sivan 2021, and then when that didn't work, we went for Sivan 2021 twice. So now we're going for Tammuz 7 and 8, which I'll explain. Tammuz 7-8 is actually, well, Tammuz 8 is the 1NC Super Pentecost from our installation over the 1NCs once we became non-Adamic in Zoa, and Tammuz 2021 is the 2NC Super Pentecost from our installation over the 2NCs in Zoa when we became non-Adamic. We were installed over the 2NCs in Zoa 2012, Chislev 21, the late 2NC Pentecost, the second installation after our Adamic installation on Heshvan 21 in 1999. And we were installed over the 1NCs on 2013 Elul-5, because Ab-5 was a Sabbath month. Now, you might be wondering why it is that for 14 years plus I've got this wrong, and why I think I will one day get it right. And the answer, of course, is that keep on seeking and ye shall find. But there's a more precise answer than that, which is the following. The pillar of fire and cloud of Exodus, which the Jews followed out of Egypt and in the wilderness, it didn't appear until after the end of Cakes, and then it moved from being ahead of them to being behind them after Etham and before, or at, I think between Etham and Pi-hahiroth. They came out of Egypt, they went to Succoth at the end of Cakes, they then went past Pi-hahiroth at the mouth, which is now called Sharm el-Sheikh, which means the bum of the sheikh. But Pi-hahiroth means the mouth of the channels, which is a slightly more polite way of saying the same thing, pretty much, unless the sheikh had two bums. And Etham is the edge of the wilderness. In the greater meaning, let me get this right, in the greater meaning, Pi-hahiroth is 1NC Zoa. Etham is the end of reappointed Laodicea, which is the church of the edge of the wilderness, because it began at the end of their 40-month wilderness penalty, which again is impacted by Sabbaths and Jubilees. Now, the point of me saying all this is the following. They did not see the pillar of fire and cloud until they reached Succoth, or after they reached Succoth. In other words, until after the end of Cakes. So we do not correctly see when the pillar of fire and cloud will be until after the end of the relevant Cakes. And the last Passover, which we have had wrong so many times, but the last Passover celebrated in 1NC Zoa is actually the HLC Passover on Sivan 14, 2020. And the end of Cakes would be Sivan 21. And the day after that, which is actually the solemn assembly, because Cakes and booths have become coincident, is Sivan 22. Now Sivan 21 was our last failed prediction made on ER22, and we made our present prediction on Sivan 22. So we made the prediction on Sivan 22, which is the day after the end of Cakes, which is when we should see the pillar of fire and cloud. In other words, predict it correctly. In other words, see when it occurs. Okay? The Jews seeing the pillar of fire and cloud is their antitypes, the Lord's witnesses, seeing correctly the correct prediction for the pillar of fire and cloud. The pillar of fire and cloud moving from in front to behind is the fire sign actually occurring, and instead of being ahead of you in time, it's behind you in time. That hasn't happened yet. But before it moves from front to back, you have to see it, by which it is meant, not just realise that there is going to be a fire and cloud, which we've realised for 14 years. You have to see when it occurs. You have to see the prediction correctly. So that is prophesied by the history of the Exodus as occurring after, very soon after or on the end of Cakes, which is when they reach Succoth, which means booths, of course. Cakes and booths are prophesied to be coincident by the fact that they ended the first Cakes festival there ever was in booths, in Succoth, which means booths in Hebrew. So that's when you see it. You see it just at the end of Cakes. And it's the final Cakes of the escape, which is the last Passover held in 1 NC Zohar. It's the Passover of the first HLC marriage. There is a second HLC marriage, and the Passover for that is Tammuz 14. But that meal, that Passover meal, is actually held in the ark, because Jesus said, I'm here standing knocking at the door. Whoever opens to me, I will come into his place and take the meal, evening meal with him, and he with me. In other words, he will also come into my place, take the evening meal with me. So there must be at least one Passover that's held in the ark, in Jesus' place. And there's only one left of the second HLC marriage. So everybody gets raptured for that on the 14th, instead of being raptured on the marriage day. And the reason for that is that the mark of the beast, it becomes impossible to buy or sell without the mark of the beast on Tammuz 14. And Jesus tries to keep people out of the hour of the test, according to Revelation 3. The test being, are you going to be conned by the demons into accepting the mark, believing that will lead you to salvation, whereas in fact it's God who leads you to salvation, not the mark. The choice is mark or ark. Alright, so that's the first thing. The first thing is, nobody ever could have seen the cloud until they reached Succoth, until the end of Cakes, and of the relevant Passover, and that was Sivan 22, and that's when we saw the present prediction and published it on Twitter. Well, it's taken me a long time to write it up because there's been a lot of changes. Now, to go to more detail of this, here is the whole deal. And I think we've been closing in on this, but we've absolutely nailed it. It's all to do with a super Pentecost. What is a super Pentecost? Well, it's all to do with the definition of a Pentecost, which is in Leviticus 23 verses 15 and 16. And you must count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day of your bringing the sheaf of the wave offering, which is first fruits. 7 Sabbaths, they should prove to be complete. And then verse 16, to the day after the 7th Sabbath, you should count 50 days. And you must present a new grain offering to Jehovah. That's it. Now, that definition was interpreted in terms of weekly Sabbaths for the Jews. Hence, they hold their Pentecost on a different day of the week, depending on when first fruits is. And when Jesus died, first fruits was Nisan 16, and so the Pentecost was Sivan 5 in Acts 2. Nisan 33, but in another year it will be a different first fruits day and therefore a different Pentecost. What we do to get a super Pentecost is we don't take these Sabbaths to be weekly Sabbaths. We take them to be Pentecostal festival Sabbaths, which is another form of Sabbath, because it doesn't say that you must count for yourselves from the day after the weekly Sabbath, from the day of you bringing the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 weekly Sabbaths, they should prove to be complete. It just says Sabbath, so it could be festival Sabbath or weekly Sabbath. And there are 2 different ways that we're interpreting this. One, in verse 15, you substitute weekly Sabbath, or you take Sabbath, not to mean weekly Sabbath, but to mean Pentecostal festival Sabbath, but in verse 16 you leave it as meaning weekly Sabbath. That gives you one type of generalised Pentecost, and then the other interpretation is you take both verses as not referring to weekly Sabbaths but referring to Pentecostal festival Sabbaths. Right, when you take verse 15 as being Pentecostal rather than weekly Sabbath, what you get is the first fire sign and the second fire sign. So the 0th Sabbath, we were installed, or Laodicea, was installed actually on 2003 Shabbat 21. They were appointed on Chislev 2, which is third 2NC first fruits, because they were the third group appointed to feed the 1NCs. You're appointed to feed at the 1NCs at the 2NC festival, and you're appointed over the 1NCs at the 1NC festival, Pentecost, or first fruits. And you're appointed to feed the 2NCs at the 1NC first fruits and installed at 1NC Pentecost, and you're appointed to rule over the 2NCs at the 2NC first fruits and installed at the 2NC Pentecost. That's how it works. You have to know all this. In order to get the correct prediction and solve 1 Kings 18 and win the contest, you have to become an absolute festival geek. You have to understand everything there is to understand of any importance, I suppose, about Hebrew festival and about the code and counting. God has designed it that way in order that this church, which is a research church, the Lord's Witness is really the only research church that pretty much exclusively concentrates on research in the world, Christian research church. All the other churches do a lot of evangelism. We don't really do any, we just do research. So we don't have that many people, but we have great understandings. So we're the Church of Mary, not the Church of Martha. We sit at Jesus' feet. And in order to win the contest, you have to sit at his feet a long time, and you have to get the code and get all the things about festivals. In other words, God doesn't give you the answer until you've done all the research work and all the decoding work he requires a true church to do. And we hope that we have now done that. So here's the result. Although they were appointed, Laodicea, over the 1NCs to feed them, 2003 Chislev 2, which is third 2NC first fruits, they were not installed 50 days later at the Pentecost on Tebeth 21, because that was the Sabbath month. They were installed Shabbat 21 in the next month, notwithstanding the fact that it's a Jubilee month, because you can be installed in a Jubilee, but you can't be installed on a Sabbath. Then they spied on us for 12 times, the 12 spies, and they betrayed us for those 12 times because they stole our baptism, and that's Judas being one of the 12. One of the 12 is a witness to 12 times dead. So that takes you for 12 years, from 2003 Shabbat 21, 2015 Shabbat 21. Then they spied for 40 days. That takes you from Shabbat 21 to Adar 30, the end of the year. Then they got a 40-month wilderness penalty from Nisan 1, 2016 to Tammuz 30, 2019. Then they were reappointed as a true church on Ab 10, Temple Burning Day. It's a funny day to reappoint as a true church, but the Laodiceans by that time had separated themselves from the Watchtower. So when they got appointed as a true church, what then happened was that the Watchtower temple itself began to be burnt by the Laodiceans, because a chunk of JWs were now in the true church that wasn't part of the Watchtower. That was the temple burning that occurred on Ab 10. And then on Ab 14 their constant feature was restored, and then on Ab 21 they were appointed once again to feed the 1NCs. When a church falls, it first of all loses its appointment over the saints, then it loses its water baptism, then it loses its constant feature, which means its worship is rejected, but they're still a true church. They're constructively a false church at that point because their worship has been rejected, and then finally they become a false church. Those are the 4 stages. Lose your power over the saints, lose your water baptism, lose your constant feature, lose your true church status. When you become a true church, when you're reappointed, it all happens in reverse. So they became a true church Ab 10, they got their constant feature back Ab 14. Actually they never got a water baptism, they're a dry church, so they missed out that step. And they got their appointment over the saints on Ab 21. And Russell came to see them the first Sabbath of weeks, of Laodicean reappointment weeks, which was Ab 27. And then he went to see Thomas and who's Jonah, 8 days of John 20 later on Elul 5. And they were reinstalled on Tishri 10, and they fell a stretched hand of Moses later on Adar 10 as a true church. So in other words, Elijah goes to the top of Carmel, and the 0th Sabbath, the installation of Laodicea, was 2003 Shabbat 21. Then you have to have a no-show in 1 Kings 18, which makes it a 0th Sabbath, if you like. But the whole of Laodicea was a no-show, it was a hidden church. And then first fruits, the first fruits after that, 2NC first fruits, is 2004 Tishri 2. And then the first completed Pentecostal 2NC Sabbath is 2004 Heshvan 21, Chislev 21. Completed because you got the late festival as well as the regular festival. And then the second completed, because the Sabbaths must be complete, and we're taking them as Pentecostal festival Sabbath. So the second completed one is in fact 2005, not Chislev 21 but Tebet 21, because 2005 Heshvan 21 was in the Sabbath month, etc., down to the 7th completed Sabbath 2010 Chislev 21. And then the Super Pentecostals you count to the day after. Now, if we're taking verse 16 to be weekly Sabbaths, then the day after just a regular weekday. So it's Chislev 22, the day after the 7th completed Pentecostal festival Sabbath. And that is when the attendant Dean actually called the fire sign on Mount Carmel as a fire sign. So that's when we saw the first fire sign, on the day after the regular weekly day. Actually, it was a Sabbath, weekly Sabbath, but it was the Gregorian day after the Pentecost. So that's the first fire sign. The second fire sign has the same pattern, where we take verse 15 to be Pentecostal festival Sabbaths, but we take verse 16 to be weekly Sabbaths, and that starts with our installation over to feed the 1NCs, which occurred not on 2013 Ad 5, but 2013 LL 5. It was the fourth installation after FGS 3, Adamic FGS 4, and Adamic Laodicea. So it would have occurred at the fourth version of the 1NC Pentecost, which is actually the late second. You got the first 1NC Pentecost in 2013, which was Sivan 7. You have the second Pentecost, which was Tammuz 5. You have the late first one, which was Tammuz 7, and the late second, which was Ab 5. But Ab 5 was in the Sabbath month, so it's bumped to Elul 5. So we were installed in Elul 5 to feed the Laodiceans, and the no-show is our failed prediction, Elul 7 to 8. And then first fruits, 1NC first fruits after that is 2014 Nisan 20. And then the completed Pentecostal Festival Sabbath was 2014 Tammuz 9. And then the 7th Sabbath, it was 2020 Tammuz 7. And then the day after that, the 50 count, taking it just as another weekday, because verse 16 we're taking as literal days, not festival Sabbaths, literal weeks with literal weekly Sabbaths. And then the Super Pentecost is Tammuz 8, which is the day after Tammuz 7. Hence we're predicting Tammuz 7-8 2020 for the second fire sign. And then here's the big one, the third fire sign. Now this time we're taking every Sabbath in the definition of the Pentecost, in both verse 15 and verse 16, as being a Pentecostal festival Sabbath. So what that means is that the 0th Sabbath, when we were installed over the 2NCs and reached the top of Mount Carmel, which is the top of the administration, which is our maximum installation, our power as installation, was 2012 Chislev 21, the late 2NC Pentecost, because we were installed second after ourselves, not Adamically, this was our non-Adamic installation. The second installation over 2NCs, the previous one being 1999 Heshvan 21, when we were installed as a non-Adamic church over them. The no-show was 2012 Chislev 24, 2012 Chislev 25 to Tebet 2, this was Hanukkah. These were two failed predictions. And first fruits is 2012 Tebet 2, 2NC first fruits after the 0th Pentecost. And then the first week, which is a week of Pentecosts, is 2013 Heshvan 21, the 2NC Pentecost, then Chislev 21, the late version, then Tebet 21, the late, then Shabbat 21, the late, then Adar 21, the late, then 2014 Nisan 21 was a monthly Sabbath, so you jump that. That's what we didn't do last time. And then you've got ER 21 and Sivan 21. So that is a week of Pentecosts. That's week 1. Then week 2 is the same thing, but a year forward, with the Sabbath missed out. And week 7 is the same thing, but 6 years forward, with the Sabbath missed out. So this is a week of regular or late annual 2NC Pentecosts, which in week 7 was 2019 Heshvan 21, Chislev 21 Tebet, Shabbat 21 was the Sabbath, monthly Sabbath, Adar 21, Nisan 21, ER 21, Sivan 21. So that's the 49th 2NC Pentecost. Then you've got to go to the 50th 2NC Pentecost, because we're taking it not as the next day, but as the next Pentecostal Festival Sabbath day, which is a later 2NC Pentecost, which will be 2020 Tammuz 21. That is the 50th counted 2NC Pentecost from our installation, and that is your Super Pentecost, and that is when the third fast sign will occur. In fact, at the absolute completion of that day in the UK, according to Acts 2. Have a look at Understanding 271-11. You can see it all written out. But that's how it works. That's what 1 Kings 18 is about. It's about generalizing the Leviticus 23 definition of a Pentecost to apply not merely to weekly Sabbaths, but also to apply in the greater meaning to Pentecost, to annual Pentecosts, which are annual Pentecostal festival Sabbaths. Alright, so that is technical. That's how difficult it was, if we now have it right. Now we come to Acts 3, which is absolutely beautiful, and how to sentence count that. And let me take you to that, because it's something else. It's another aspect of the code. It shows you the precision. Look, this is literary engineering. It is as difficult as anything God did, including the structure of the universe, DNA, and the tragedy is that mankind has completely ignored it and gone and focused on absolutely everything else they possibly could, but not on the literary coded brilliance of God's book. But here we will try and expose it. So Peter grabbed this guy. He was lame, and he's sitting by the temple gate in they're called the Beautiful Gate. At the 9th hour it was. Whenever Peter does something in an hour, it's always a call into a spirit covenant, alright? Because the Pentecost in 33 Nisan 5 was at the 3rd hour of the day. That was a call to the proselytes. The Samaritan call was at the 6th hour of the day in Acts 8. The Gentile call was at the 9th hour of the day in Acts 10. And here we are in Acts 3 actually, the 9th hour of the day again. And this is the Benjamin call, the brother of Joseph, into the 2NC. Benjamin are amazing. They have an exception to the rule. They're God's final act of love. Well, actually not his final act, but a very unexpected act of love from people who spent their lives in Christian churches, who always undersell God's love. It's fantastic. He's going to make an extra bunch of 144,000 kings based on love, not based on faith. These people are unrighteous. They can be breaking all of God's laws. Doesn't matter, as long as they've got love. They're the good Samaritans. That's the basis on which he chooses these kings. It's a fantastic group, an amazing group of people. The guys who, yeah, they don't know how to behave, but they do know the only thing that matters in behaviour, which is love. They have it for their brothers, and that's what God is really trying to grow. They don't have much love for God, but they've got it for the brothers. And if they've got it for the brothers, they'll eventually grow it for God too. So here's what the scripture says. He seized him by the right hand. Benjamin means son of the right hand. This is a cryptic clue telling you this is a Benjamin call. And he raised him up. And it says instantly the soles of him and his ankle spheres were made firm. And leaping out, he stood and began walking. And he entered with them into the temple, walking and leaping and praising God. Very carefully worded. My favourite thing is in the next verse, verse 9, which is just as carefully worded. And everybody saw him walking and praising God. And the omission is nobody saw him leaping. Why? His leaping was invisible. Why? He leapt into the ark. Nobody sees you when you jump into the ark or when you bounce back out again. It's the classic omission symbolism. He was leaping, he was walking, he was praising God. And everybody saw him walking and praising God. The question you have to ask is, why didn't they see him leaping? That's one of the key ways in scriptures are written. Ask the question, then you get the answer, because he leapt in a clandestine way into the ark. Alright, so you count it. Seize him at the right hand 5 times. Raise him up 1 time. Soles of the feet of him, that's 2 times. Ankle spheres another 2 times. That makes 10 times. Alright, so it's 10 times. And leaping forth. Now he didn't do that with Peter's right hand or having been raised up. He did it with the soles of his feet and his ankle spheres. So you multiply that by 4, because there's 2 ankle spheres and 2 soles of his feet, which have been made firm in order that he can do this. And he leaps forth 1 time and he stood. Now it doesn't say he leapt out and he stood. And it doesn't say having leapt out, he stood. It says leaping out, he stood. So leaping is not a separate action. It's a qualification of the method by which he stood. So it's 1 times 1, which is 1, it's not 2. And then he began walking. Now again, he began walking with his 2 soles and his 2 ankle spheres. So that's 4 times 1 plus 1, which gives you 8. And then here's the really clever one. It says, and he entered with them into the temple. Now he entered multiplied by 4, but he entered with them, which adds 2 because there's 2 of them, but they're not multiplied by 4 because their ankle spheres and soles of their feet weren't made firm. So that is 4 times 1 plus 2. It is not 4 times 1 plus 4 times 2. In other words, it's 6. And it's multiplied by 3 because what was he doing? He was leaping, walking and praising. Got 3 actions in this state. So you got 6 times 3, which is 18, and you got 8, and then you got 10. 36 times. You add that to when he finished being raised up, the end of his baptism, the end of the 144 days of the Benjamin call, which is the lead of the wall of Revelation 21 of the city. That's a man and measure and an angel's measure, because this is a man who becomes an angel, and it's the first instance of that happening by Holy Spirit baptizing him as a human. Holy Spirit normally baptizes from heaven. Sorry, the Spirit baptism occurs from heaven, but Benjamin's baptism occurs on the earth, in 1 NC Zoa and then in 2 NC Zoa. It's a proselyte Spirit baptism, which is an unprecedented, well, no, it's not unprecedented. Heavenly proselyte Spirit baptisms have existed before, but earthly Spirit baptisms have never existed before as far as I'm aware. So it's a fantastic thing. And 36 times after Abtu is 2020 Elul 8, and that is when Benjamin finishes his leaping and is entirely in the ark. That's when his rapture is completed. And here's where the power of that is. It's the end of the 60 cubits of the image of Daniel 3 of the mark of the beast test. The 60 cubits height of the image. That is the period of 60 days during which the mark of the beast test affects the heavens, which is the saints. And the last one of them to go into the ark is Benjamin. When you're in the ark, the mark of the beast cannot affect you, because what the mark of the beast does is it makes it impossible to buy or sell anything down here. But you don't need to do that if you're resident in the ark, because you can have all your meals and everything you need in the ark by bouncing up there, having a nice meal and bouncing back down, or bouncing up there, getting some clothes, or having a sleep in your bed. You're basically a tourist down here on a day trip, to a foreign country, where you don't eat anything in the foreign country if you've got the mark. Well, maybe you can if somebody gives you some food, but you don't buy any food. So once you're in the ark, you're immune from the mark. So that the mark test stops affecting all saints on Elul 8. So it starts affecting all saints on Tammuz 8. And that's when the mark becomes law. That's when the mark is inaugurated on Tammuz 8. And it's got a width of 6 cubits, which takes you to Tammuz 14. When it becomes impossible, that's when the mark is enforced, it's compulsory, it becomes impossible to buy or sell without the mark, because you can't actually move any money around, because by then you've got to have these beast marks, which is the new currency that's going to be introduced, some kind of cryptocurrency, one imagines, in order to control people 100%. And so you have to convert existing currency into beast marks. And if you don't, I'm calling them beast marks, God knows what they'll be called. To be something wonderful, it won't be the beast mark. It will sound great, but it won't be. And once you've got that currency, you'll be able to, and you have a UNID number, the mark of the beast. When you log into your bank to make a transfer, you need a UNID number, and the transfer will not occur unless it's in beast marks. That's why everything's gone electronic, and they want to do away with cash. And COVID-19 is a pretext to do that, because cash they can't control. And the reason they want you to be isolated and to do everything by Zoom and by Skype is they can see what you're doing then. They can't see what you're doing if you actually meet up and have a chat. So beware, it's very clever. The demons have arranged things so that every single action of every human, whatever they buy, whatever they sell, whoever they speak to, is monitored and controlled by them. They are the ultimate control freaks, and they do it making you think it's in your interest for them to control your life. Believe me, it is not in your interest. It's absolutely the worst possible thing you can do, but they will make it look like it is the best possible thing, because they are fantastic at deception. Really, really good. And C19 is the jewel in the crown of their deceptive system. The way they've treated it, it is of course just a form of the flu. Pernicious, but not if it's treated correctly, but then they don't treat it correctly. So that's I wanted to show you the complexity and the intricacy of the counting and the brilliance of the wording of this book. That is my job. My job, you might think, is to get this date right, and in a simple sense that is my job, but that's not really my job. My job is to decode the Bible to the point where it becomes apparent to anybody with faith that it is written in the code and that I have decoded it correctly. And then I show you the code, and then the Holy Spirit blesses you and you join me in this treasure hunt to find out all of the fantastic everlasting life and divine goodies. I mean, all the way up to everlasting angelic life and indeed divinity, which God is offering mankind and always has offered mankind, but it's been hidden from you by churches who do not represent God but represent Satan, and by a whole system that is representing that it's going to save your life from the terrible C19, but what it's actually doing is legislating the annihilation of the species through climate destruction, through social destruction, through cultural assassination, through individual liberty destruction, through control by murderers and liars, who are the demons. Because Satan was the father of the lie and the manslayer when he began. Although Satan has repented, because Satan, one, has to expel Satan too. If Satan expels Satan, his house has become divided, said Jesus. He didn't say Satan won't be expelling Satan. And any hypothetical in the scripture will be fulfilled, because every word that comes out of Jehovah's mouth has to yield results. Or Jesus' mouth when he's representing Jehovah, which he does. So that's that one. Let's go back. So the effect of understanding correctly that you cannot have a festival in the Sabbath, but you can have one in the Jubilee, was to bump everything forward a month. Not everything, but certain things. In particular, the presence, the second presence, didn't end 2013 Shabbat 10. It ended 2013 Adar 10, because the feeding of the 4,000, which is the feeding for 4,000 days of 1 NC saints in Laodicea, started ER 8, 6 days before they were baptized, because Jesus arrived at Bethany 6 days before the Passover, and they were baptized at the Passover on 2006 ER 14, beginning the second presence, which was 3.5 years after 2001 Heshvan 14, when the Watchtower lost its water baptism, that being one of the banks of the river of Daniel 12. The 4,000 days has to last 1 month longer, because there's a 1 month larger gap in the middle of it, because they were uninstalled, not able to feed, not from their non-Adamic transition, 2012 Sivan 14 to 16, starting from there all the way to 2013 Elul 5, when they were reinstalled to feed, not Ab 5, which was during the Sabbath month. So because 2013 was a Sabbath month, you bump forward the reinstallation to feed the 4,000 by a month, and what that does is it puts a month bigger gap in it, so it's got to end a month later. So it ends not 2013 Shabbat 10, but 2013 Adar 10. And that means that the third presence begins 5.5 years of Daniel 12 later in 2019 Elul 10, which is perfect, because that is 430 years a month for a day after the Watchtower became Egypt, when it became a false church, 2005 ER 14. 430 years a month for a day is 14 years and 4 months. And that takes you 2005 ER 14 to 2019 Elul 14, which is the Passover. But actually, the armies come out of Egypt during the Watchtower Passover, which wasn't a one-day event. It went from Elul 14 all the way to Tebeth 14. And they come out to be baptized as victims of the Passover, the first ones, on Elul 10. Although actually, the ones who got baptized on Elul 10 weren't really in Egypt. They were in Laodicea. So the presence began with Laodiceans being baptized who'd already left Egypt. So the exodus from Egypt did occur between Elul 14, because the first 1 NCs, the 2,000 pigs, who now begin Adar 10, 2013, and end Elul 30, 2019. And that's when the first 1 NC reserves from the Watchtower leave that church in order to jump into the Sea of the World and drown in the waters, actually of the 3 EC baptism, which wasn't given to Laodicea, but the descended 1 NCs, well, it was kind of given to Laodicea, only for the 1NCs. So they don't turn up until after LL30, so they attend the Tishri 14 Passover, not the LL14 Passover. So the first guy to escape from the watchtower from Egypt escaped after or on LL14, and the last one escaped actually I think by Tebet 21, the last day of cakes, because they escaped from Egypt during cakes. They didn't actually leave Egypt on the Passover. They collected at Ramesses on the day of the Passover, and they didn't get out of Egypt till first fruits. So likewise, the whole thing is Passover and cakes. So everybody, or every single saint, all of Israel, left the watchtower between Elul 14, 2019 and Tammuz 21, 2019. So there's the chronology of Laodicea, altered by a month. It alters a few other things by a month. This concept that you cannot hold a festival in a Sabbath month but can hold it in the Jubilee. Alright, so I've got one more thing to say, which is the Jericho campaign. Our Jericho campaign against Laodicea, it did not start on Ab 5, 2013, or on Ab 2013, because that was a Sabbath month. And neither did it start Elul when we were installed over the 1NCs on Elul 5, 2013. Because it says, I've given Jericho into your hand, so you can have 5 times or 5 months. So you count 5 months, Elul, Tishri, Heshvan, Chislev, Tebeth. It began in Tebeth. Our campaign against Laodicea began 2013 Tebeth 1, and it lasts for 6 years, and then in the 7th year you go around 7 times. That takes you to 2020 Tammuz 30, when we would have stopped going round, and the wall of Laodicea fell down in the sense that they lost their law, Adar 10, and the 1NCs and the HLCs from Laodicea went into 1NC Zoa, but the 2NCs did not. They cannot go into 1NC Zoa. It's for 1NCs and HLCs, which are their servants. They have to come into 2NC Zoa, which is us. And the wall between Laodicea and 2NC Zoa has not yet fallen down. And the spies don't knock the wall down. They come here without knocking the wall down. They come here being let down by a rope through the window in Rahab's house on the wall. So the wall falls down, I think. Well, we start baptizing people on Tammuz 1, so that could be it. And we baptize them for 16 days of 2 Chronicles 29 to the 16th of the month, which is Tammuz 16, but excluding the installation of the altar, which is the first 2NC marriage from Tammuz 2 to Tammuz 8, and excluding the Sabbath on Tammuz 11. So that makes 8 days of 2 Chronicles 29 when we sanctify the house of Jehovah. And then the Jubilee release for Laodicea is Ab 10. That's the 8th month of the 7th campaign day. That's the Jubilee month. Because you take all 7 of the months in the 7th campaign year as being Sabbath months, because they're in the manufactured Sabbath year, the 7th year. So each month is a part of a Sabbath, so it's a Sabbath month. So that's 7 Sabbaths. Then you go to the 8th for the next one for the Pentecost or the Jubilee, which is Ab this year. And Ab 10 is the Jubilee release. But Ab 10 is Temple Burning Day. That is the last day you can get a 4EC baptism, because it's a temple burning day. You burn the temple after then. Nobody can get into it. Nobody can get a 4EC baptism. So that's the Jubilee release of Laodicea. That's when we get the last Laodicean priest into this church. That's when not only has the wall fallen down, but we've captured the city in terms of the priestly administration of that city. So that's a revision to Jericho. And that's everything I wanted to cover. So just to recap, the 2 fire signs, the second one is Tammuz 7-8, which is June 29 to July 1 in New York, and the third fire sign is Tammuz 2021, which is July 12 to 14 around about Dartford, making a cloud above the Thames. Thank you.